Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to another great webinar from CPA Academy. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Lady Maya, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar on diversity and inclusion, one-on-one, oblivious to my leadership superpower. Our presenter today is Jina Etienne and Cecilia Leung. Before we get started, let's do some technical checks and then I'll cover some housekeeping items. First, if y'all don't mind going over to the GoToWebinars questions tab on your control panel and let me know if you can hear my voice and see the title slide. Feel free to let me know where you are listening from. Hello, Minnesota, West Palm Beach. I hope the weather is nice. Yo from Atlanta. Okay, yo from Philly. All right, looks good and sounds good. Now that I know everything is working, let's go through some housekeeping. This is a 1 CPE credit webinar. The way you earn that credit is fairly straightforward. Just stay logged in for 50 minutes and answer the poll questions. We'll have 4 polls, and to earn full credit, you will need to answer at least 3 of those polls. Now, if you are on a mobile device, you might need to click your answer a few times and scroll down to find the submit button. And if you have to log out and log back in for any reason, our system will keep track of your time. I wanted to let you know that we are recording today's webinar, and the archive, along with your CPE credit, will be available in your CPA Academy account within 24 hours. We also recommend that you download today's presentation materials, which can be found in the control panel's handouts tab. Now that we're all set, let's welcome our presenter. Jina, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Lady Maya. And I'm just so excited for you guys to get to meet Cecilia, or Cece, today. So let's start with an introduction. So Cecilia, or Cece, I first met her last summer when she was working on her new book, and there'll be more on that later. We've actually never met in person. This is only the second time we've been on video together. And I'm really excited for her to join us today because she's incredible. And in her bio, you can see she's described as a global professional, and that's really timely for today's conversation. And while you read the details, let me just say how much I admire how Cece's been able to own her journey and find power in her own voice. After many years in corporate America, and she's also worked in public accounting, she recently launched her own business. It's called the Entrepreneur CFO, and they provide advisory services and financial services to growing companies. And so, Cece, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, the usual starting question I ask is this conversation today, especially the title, I love it, Oblivious to My Leadership Superpower. That was one of your ideas, and I think that this conversation means a lot to you. Tell us more about why this is so important.
Yeah, I think we're going through such crazy, incredible times right now, and I never really thought about my experience or my identity or was anything special. Usually, for the past 2 decades of my career, or even earlier, I just kind of roll with things and let it unfold. And how often do we actually have a moment to reflect? So I think until more people start talking about it, asking me about it, so I realized I need to get out of my comfort zone and have a voice in this topic. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be here to chat with you.
Well, we have a lot more to talk about. So I'm going to move us forward. We have a couple of slides. It's not a true presentation, so we may ping back and forth a little bit. But, Cece, you share these things as things that you want to start with. And how about we go back to your childhood upbringing, and how did your background, because you're from Hong Kong, right? Mm-hmm. And you were born there?
Yeah, I was born and raised there until I was 16 years old, moved to Canada.
So yeah, I saw in your bio that you were there too. So the global professional, right? How does that influence then? Because now you're here in corporate America, and you're working. So how has that cultural background led you to where you are today, and how you view yourself as a leader today?
Yeah, I often go back. Doesn't matter, I interview people for my book, and I often very interested in their backstory, because I think that period of time when you're a child or upbringing is super important to shape your values and beliefs. So I often, so let me share kind of like a little bit of my background. So I was born and raised in Hong Kong, and my mom was a nurse, and my father was a teacher. So a very humbling working middle class. And of course, growing up, our expectation was very clear. Respect and obey your parents and elderlies, do well in school and extracurricular activities, make our family proud, right? And what's considered success is you either own your business or become a professional. So then I became an accountant.
Wait, so you're saying, wait, sorry to interrupt. You're saying picking a job that was considered professional, opposed to, I guess, blue collar type work,
well,
was what was considered success. And before you say any more, hold on. I dropped a really important ball. We need to ask a polling question. So maybe we should, Lady Maya, maybe we can launch that first one so we don't get fired by our participants. So I don't know if you're on mute, but the question is, did your cultural background instill different expectations of leadership qualities?
Yes, thank you so much. And this is a yes or no answer. This is the first poll out of 4. Remember, you must answer 3 polls to get that CPE credit. All right, we're just going to have some votes coming in. Voting pretty fast. All right, everyone. I'm going to leave that open for about 30 more seconds.
You know, sorry, Cece, I forgot we were supposed to ask that question, and it's relevant for what you're talking about, culture and how it influences our leadership qualities. So I'm really curious to see what the responses are. I think we have just a few more seconds.
All right, I'm going to close that poll in 3, 2, 1. I'm going to go ahead and share those results. 67% say yes, 33% say no. Am I good to take the poll down?
Yep.
All right.
So Cece, you were talking exactly about these cultural differences, and 2/3 of the people said their background and their expectations of leadership qualities were different. Does this align with your experience that you're going into your story?
I think in my 20s, I was struggling, failed miserable to find myself. It might not be so bad, because we're still trying to find our place, find our voice, right? But it wasn't until in my 30s, and I intentionally worked really hard to, seek out mentors, to really speak up and do all these different things as I was rising in the leadership position. Otherwise, I didn't think I would make it. So to me, my cultural background has a big influence in kind of how I navigate my career journey. And I didn't know how to use that to incorporate, it was great qualities, but I think it's almost like I somehow let these voices just affect me in a negative way instead of using it as a strength. So.
Can I show your picture? You know, the one that we have in the slides?
Yes.
So this is Cece. You think you were about 3? Is that what you said?
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, 3.
I think this is an adorable picture, by the way. But I think this is where some of those thoughts start. You mentioned earlier, it's as young as childhood where we start learning these stories about, especially as women, what does leadership mean? And are we part of the vision for what leadership looks like?
Yeah, I think when we're young, I talk about my childhood, right? So most of the Asians can relate, right? So what did our parents taught us, right? Work harder than everyone else. Keep your head down, do work harder than anyone else. Stay out of trouble, right? So look at this little girl. Did anyone ever tell me that my voice matter? Probably not, right? Because that's not our culture. We just wanted to have a stable life, it's probably just keep our voice down or don't speak at all. Otherwise you are a troublemaker, right? So.
Well, it's interesting. So Peter shared a comment that everyone's parents teaches them that, thank you, Peter, for sharing that. And I think to some degree that's true. So maybe can you touch on, because when we were talking about this the other day, you mentioned something about cultural and the word deference. And I think that there's a difference culturally, how you show respect. In other words, so here's what I'm thinking. Please correct me if I'm wrong or saying this wrong. One way to show respect, at least in the culture that you grew up in, was to be quiet and to sort of, you don't challenge authority. Versus maybe in other cultures, part of the way you become a leader is by showing that you can challenge and sharing different ideas. So maybe I'm confusing two things, but you talked about a culture of deference. Can you talk about what that means?
Yeah, I think it depends on your upbringing, like what kind of role models you have, right, in your life, at school, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I feel like for me, like I didn't have anybody who were in business. Like I didn't even know how it looked like. So I kind of carried the same belief and kind of just graduated from college, just kind of rolled into the corporate world. And of course, in the first couple of years, I kept working hard. It's a great quality. So of course you work hard. But then I do remember, I worked really hard for promotion and didn't get it. And I was devastated. And then of course people told me, and then all of a sudden I saw everyone else, those ones who were more vocal, who got promoted. And then at the time, I didn't understand. I was frustrated. And then of course people around me told me, you're in New York and you're female, you are Asian. It's hard to rise up in such an environment, right?
Wait, was the person who told you that also Asian, or was it somebody else? I'm just curious.
Mostly Asians, I have to admit. But I think maybe, mostly Asians. And of course, at the time, I partially accepted, but I also didn't believe entirely. But again, I was really young. I didn't have too much reference. And so, but I did believe that I should go out and find people who value my work and see me as who I was, right? Maybe I just didn't fit in. But for the longest time, when I was in 20s, I still tried to fit into that mold, right? But it really wasn't me. Because think about it, what is leadership? Like how does or should a leader look like, right? You're supposed to be loud, talk really fast and be like aggressive, ambitious, right? That was back in the old days. We're talking about like 15 years ago. Versus today, I think it's a little bit different, right? Like some of these female qualities are being nurtured, hopefully, right? you're being female, being nurtured, being a good listener, all that stuff.
I'm sort of going like, I think that in corporate speak today, and in corporate America today, broadly the ideas that leadership can show up differently are valued, that women might show up differently, that there are cultural differences that might show up, and that we need to see and respect those differences. I think that's all laudable. I'm not sure that's how things actually are yet. I think we're working to get there. I don't know, that's just what I believe. And I think that we're making progress, but I'm not convinced. So here's why I asked you that question earlier. Was another person who was Asian, did they say that to you? Because part of me feels like if somebody wasn't Asian and they said that to you, I would feel like, so the idea of microaggression comes to mind. Like they're saying something to undermine your confidence as opposed to help you identify an area that you can build on. So that's why I was worried about that, because that stuff does happen.
I think they said it for good, like they meant well. They want me to feel better because I was really some sort of outsider. I was in New York, maybe temporarily, who knows, right? I really was here just trying my luck. For the first couple of years. I've been here 15 years now. Right. So
you're a New Yorker now.
Right. So I think it didn't make me feel better, but I also didn't want to settle with that idea. But one of the important points that I did want to say is I mentioned there were other people who were more vocal about it. They got promoted, right? And I felt like, okay, being quiet is not a detriment. right? Why I worked really hard. Why didn't anybody see that? But then I realized later, as I continue to rise in my career, there's a really important point to it, that people are being more vocal because communication skills is super important. You need to speak to people, especially as a leader. You need to communicate and speak to people in a way that your vision and message come across strong, or people understand exactly what you're saying. First of all, you need to speak up, right? Second, you need to speak in a way that people understand what you're saying. So I think there's an important point there, but no one ever taught me that. No one ever framed it like that to me, because otherwise, a lot of people ask me what you wish you knew when you were younger, right? That question. I honestly think there's obviously a lot of things, but as a young person, even if someone told me, I might not entirely get it. So, or that question often come up. What would you do differently? I don't think I would do anything differently. However, I did think I would feel differently, and that's super important, right? At least I didn't have that defeated feeling, just hopeless, and feel very ashamed of being an Asian female. So I think that's super important.
I love that idea of knowing how you would feel. I don't think I've ever thought of it that way. So thank you. That's interesting. And you touched on something earlier, so I'm going to come back to that. Let me look at the time. All right, we're good. You said in your 20s you were clueless, but you weren't really. It sounds to me like by that you might have meant you didn't really know what you thought you should be doing, but you were noticing and you were taking notes. Yes? Like you were specifically paying attention to the things that you thought you needed to do?
I was still chasing after what I always knew a good life would look like. That I need to establish my career quick, make money because I need to get married and have kids and do all that stuff, right? So I was still chasing after that. So I worked really, really, really hard, right? And so, of course, I needed to get promoted because I need to rise up fast. So I was just kind of frantically doing all these different things, but kept on just failing miserably in all of different aspects, trying to fit in to working in corporate. And so at the end, what was the result of that is, we all remember 2008 financial crisis. There was a lot of corporate politics, and it's not because people were bad people, but people were like we were all live in fear almost, right? Like to deal with such circumstances, and it was just a lot of corporate politics and all these different things that I didn't know how to navigate, and I just kept on working hard. I was one person like doing many people's job, and then different people take credits of your work and all this different things, and I just didn't know what to do. And eventually I got burned out and I just had to stop and took a break. So that was finally a time that all these years, almost working for a decade, that I had the time to stop and think about like what happened, like how did I get here, right? Like by that time, almost 30, I'm supposed to be, get to where I am. I have a path that I was following,
Right.
So.
Right. Or when we were talking, I don't remember what day we were talking about this, but you mentioned something about, so you're talking about this stuff now, you're sharing these thoughts and experiences, but you haven't always been comfortable talking about leadership. I have a note that you're uncomfortable talking about this stuff. And yet here you are talking about this stuff. Is this part of what you've learned as you've turned from, aspired into and become now a CFO and a leader?
Yeah, I think I'm still not very good at talking about my feelings or emotions. And so this is actually, it is something that I need to get out of my comfort zone. I do need to do it because especially in the past couple of months or the past year, right? People talk about it, it got me thinking. And I think at the beginning when all these different craziness happened, I just stay silent, or it happened. Like, I didn't come out to join the conversation or did anything right away. because these things just happen. You just kind of accept it what it is. And for the most part, during my corporate career, especially in the beginning of it, I just didn't want to think about it, because if you don't think about it, it didn't happen, right? I didn't want to plant the seed in my head, right? Like I still, in some ways, it's a good thing, because I did believe that I would find that person who would value my work, which is exactly what I did in my 30s. So after I took that break, I came back to New York. So I left, I went home to Hong Kong, and I came back. I came back after 6 months being very defeated. I was like, okay, that cannot be my life. You can't stay in that misery forever. You kind of have to, I came back out. So it took a lot of courage. But then I told myself, okay, this cannot define my life. Okay, what do I go from? What did I go from here? And so I think it's at that time. So of course I read a million books, right? So people were like, okay, seek out mentors, like, be proactive, all those different things. I was like, okay, how do I do that? So I intentionally forced myself to do it, because if I could choose, I just want to stay in the corner and do my work, like do a good job, like, and that's it. I didn't want to speak up, stand out, like, as long as someone pay me, that's okay. Like, I don't want to speak at all. Right. So I kind of had to intentionally do that. And it was then until I realized there are actually a lot of people. So I actually emailed a lot of people I went to. So I went to a lot of networking events. Mm-hmm. And there were sometimes their message resonate with me. And I email them and just, initiate a conversation, go for coffee and all that different things. And so I did find people who would support me and guide me. I've met some really good mentors who would really share their experience, how they got to where they are. Right. So I think it took me a while, but I did think, to rise up in that leadership rank, you can't do it alone. You need people to support you. Right. You need someone to share their own experience. And obviously you still have to walk your own path, but it makes it easier.
You also have to be good. You have to do the work.
Right.
Yeah. So you talked earlier about, by the way, folks, I should remind everyone, feel free to throw questions in. I'm monitoring the Q&A, and I'll just pepper you with them, Cece, as they come in. So you talked earlier about culture and perceptions and what leadership look like, own your company or be a professional. Now that you have moved up through the ranks and you're now in that leadership role, does it look and feel like what you thought it would look and feel like? In other words, when we're young, we have perceptions of leadership. We have perceptions of executives. Now you're in the role. Is it consistent with what you thought, or is it wildly different?
I think I was able to, I think it's similar, but I was in a position where I could be more confident about who I was or who I am, and be able to, for example, embrace who I am, my identity, my cultural background and all that into a leadership position. Because, when I was younger, someone might said to me, when I first became a manager, there might be people who said to me, oh, you're too nice, kind of like step it up, trying to mold me into what leadership should look like. But I think being a female, having all these nurturing qualities and more patience, good listener, those are great qualities as a leader. And I didn't want to not be a good listener in a room. Like if you see someone who looks upset, you don't want to ask them if they're okay, because this is business, this is not personal, right? You do want to ask them. Part of being a leader is to care for the people that are under your charge, right? Mm-hmm. So I think, yeah. So I hope that answered your question.
Well, yeah, and I think you made some really good points that we think we know what leadership is. There are definitions of what leadership should be. It sounds to me like the example you gave about being nice. What I heard there is, because I've received some feedback in different areas, but the story in my head was, okay, then I can't be that. I have to be something else. So now I'm trying to be something that's not me. I'm inauthentic. I'm covering up the thing that I'm supposed to not be. It's hard. You can't do all of that and then be a good leader. To be a good leader, you have to step into who you are. Doesn't mean you don't have to work on the things you need. We all need development. There are areas we could work on. So what I'm hearing you say is I needed to own my identity, take your gender, your culture, your ethnicity, your background, and be a leader with all of those things together.
Yeah, because leadership comes in many forms. Let's think about it, right? Leadership, let's think about the most important one, leadership of self. How do you lead yourself, right? Especially when you run your own business, you would know, right? Like the mental health part of it is crazy, but every day, right? So you have to manage yourself before you manage anybody, right? So again, back to this leadership of self, super important, which is you, all of us, as an individual, right? And there's diversity in there as well, because you have so many unique qualities and all these different backgrounds you have, right? It's all unique, and we have to embrace it as an individual.
And feel confident about it.
Exactly. And then of course, then we talk about like leadership in the workplace, of course, leadership in household, right? And like women are so good at it, multitasking. I don't even know how everybody does it. Like kudos to all the women in this webinar. And, or leadership, like leadership in like your community and all the other places. So I think it comes in different form, and you don't have to have like one leadership style for all these different things. So, yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and open another poll. And while that poll is open, I'm actually going to scroll through the Q&A because there are a lot of them coming in now.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and launch that second poll. This is a reminder that there are 4 polls in this session. You need to answer 3 out of 4 to get your CPE credit. And the question is, how closely does the corporate environment compare to your perceptions before you entered the workforce? You have very similar, somewhat similar, similar, and not similar.
I'm trying to think about my answer to this question.
Huh?
Well, I'm trying to think about my perceptions of the corporate workforce and then my experiences in the business, and how similar are they? And it's interesting. I'll hold my thoughts. I think we have like 10 more seconds. I don't want to say anything, but I think.
Was it good so far? Like, because I kind of.
We're going to close down the poll in 3, 2, 1. So I'm going to go ahead and share those results. 16% says very similar, 47% somewhat similar, 22% similar, and 15% not similar.
So we didn't have anybody say they didn't want to answer. I think it's, so the reason, what I was thinking about, Cece, is that is a complex, seems like a simple question, but it's actually more complex, because there were areas when I was in public accounting, there were areas of professionalism that I expected, and then there were areas that I didn't. I don't know if I should say this. Too late. When I started in public accounting, women were specifically told not to wear pants.
Women what?
At least in the area where I worked, and I don't mean just my firm, I mean I worked in DC, there was this idea that as a woman in public accounting, you wear a skirt or a suit or a dress. You don't wear pants. And that was very much consistent with what I thought should be corporate America. And I just think it's interesting, because what we think of corporate America generically, where did I get those ideas? Watching television? Probably.
See, that's also an interesting question, because for me, I would tell you how I would react to that, right? I would just follow. I wouldn't question. Okay, yeah, because that's the corporate mandate. Why would you question it? Follow it. Be part of it.
I did the same thing. I did the same. And funny, when I left public accounting, not only did I buy a lot of pantsuits, but I never wore blue again. Okay, I lie, because I'm wearing blue now. But it took me a long time, because I felt like I needed to wear blue and I needed to wear suits. Nobody actually said those things to me outright. but I just got this perception that if I'm going to be a successful woman in business, I need to follow the code. And there's a different code for me as a woman than there is a code for a man. And men, listen, there's a code that they need to comply with. I'm not suggesting this is unique to women. I'm just saying that there are these rules, unwritten rules in business. And those of us who don't know what the rules are, it's harder than those who do. So,
I think while I was listening to you, right? So I think till this day, like I understand the rules to be followed, and of course, you know, it has to be. How otherwise, how do people run companies? You know, efficiently run companies, and of course, we cannot just wear our slippers to work, right? That's for sure. But then let's say if
we can in Zoom days, but after Zoom is over, yeah, probably not.
Exactly. So, but I would think if you say, for example, in your case, if you wonder, can I wear business pants, right? Why not? Then don't just ask the question. Hopefully be in the environment that you'll be able to just say, why not? You know, it's just as professionals, right? We do our job. It's actually more comfortable for us instead of wearing a skirt. And, you know, like make it a conversation, like a meaningful conversation, not just something that, yeah, well, I want to wear slippers because, you know, you can't just, it has to be reasonable.
Yeah. So there's this really cool question. It's long, so let me read it.
Okay.
I'm in my late 20s, about to go into a leadership role, but I have always been the quiet worker in the corner like Cece described. What advice do you wish you could have told yourself when you were trying to find yourself? Wow, that's a great question. No pressure there, Cece.
I think I mentioned a lot of time, change start with you. So you need to accept yourself before other people accept you. Right. So I think this is kind of a question that we kind of need to think deeper. What does that mean? So I think for the longest time, I was just happy taking a back seat, you know, because I'm a female. Like I didn't like the spotlight. First of all, I'm also an accountant, right? We didn't like the spotlight. So that's okay. That's okay. You know, I just want to get paid, have a comfortable life.
And that's fair. Listen, that's still true for many people today. There's nothing wrong with that. It's for those of us who feel differently that it can be difficult.
Right. So, but I think if you do wanted to, but let's just say if you do aim or your goal is to be a leader. So as a leader, you do have to speak out for yourself and for other people. That's why you're a leader. There's a ton of people under your charge, right? So first of all, so let's go back to like accepting yourself. So you have to make sure you know what you want. For example, like I said, I was very comfortable. I was settled. Like I was okay being take a back seat. You know, let my boss take all the credit. It's like it's okay, right? Like no one needs to know what I did. And you know, that's not a leader. You know, as a leader, obviously take credit, still be humble, but you can speak up, have your voice heard, right? So that's that. And I think so. Again, change start with you. So think about who you are as a person. And then take it from there. And obviously there's a million other components that needs to be happening at the same time for you to succeed. You know, you need to find people, your ally, people like mentors who support you, right? Like other people who you work with also value and accept. Well, I don't know if the word is accept, but value your work and who you really are, right? Yeah, I think that's the answer to your question.
Yeah, you said own your voice, learn from others. And those are the two big things that I heard you say. You said, I don't know if the word is accept. And so then I started thinking, I don't know. I don't know if that's the right word either, but I don't know that there has to be a right word. It's a question of your colleagues, your peers, your bosses, people who report to you, they're going to give you feedback. And what I think you're saying is listen to all of that feedback, take it in and maybe reflect on it. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to change something. but it might give you an indication of areas either you could grow or things that you're doing really well.
Oh yeah, like I think good or bad criticisms, take it and think about it, right? No, because it's so important. Like I remember people used to tell me like, you speak too soft, or you don't look confident. And of course, in the first 2 or 5 seconds, I was like, what do you mean, right? Of course, you get a little offended, like, okay, exactly what do you mean? Of course, then after you had a moment to reflect, then yes, I see where they're coming from. I really didn't sound like I was confident the way I talk, and so I think it's important to take it in and think about it.
There was, I wish I found it. All right, so here, these aren't really questions so much as comments. I think it's Carol. I'm reading it right. I have glasses on. When I started, we were required to wear little lady bow ties. And yes, it was never explicitly stated. So thank you, I think it's Karen, for sharing that. I think in my case, I was an intern and I was able to wear pants to work. And then I was hired full time. And on the first day I showed up in pants as I was a full-time employee, somebody actually pulled me into their office, a woman pulled me into their office and said to me, don't wear pants. And that's when I just got this idea that I looked, that was me showing my cluelessness, but that was now when I finally looked around the office and said, oh, wow, I need to look like all these other women. And I went shopping accordingly. So yeah, I'm sure they never specifically told me to not do it as a policy, but it was clear to me that I needed to do it to be accepted.
Yeah, I think I think when I look back, kind of the 20 years in my career, I did see a lot of great changes because people really wanted to build great cultures with more flexibility in terms of the hours that we work. Oh my God, back in the days, especially in public accounting, you work 24/7 in the office. So nowadays, at least you can, well, not nowadays, maybe 10 years ago, at least you can work from home after 7 o'clock, right? Today it's even more flexible. So my point is, no, that might not be a good example, but my point is a lot of companies are changing and they need to. If you don't embrace all these different, if you don't provide people flexibility, embrace all these changes, you are at a competitive disadvantage because other companies are doing it.
So it's funny you say that. So Lady Maya, we're going to launch a polling question here in a second. So I just want to sort of tee that up. What you were talking about, Cece, is, when people talk diversity and inclusion, or DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion, a lot of things that pop up in somebody's mind immediately is race, gender, and then all of the all of the categories that are protected by the EEOC, so gender identity, ethnicity, things like that, disability. But what you're talking about is the broader conversation around diversity, which is flexibility, acknowledging that we all have different styles. When I was in practice for myself, I actually would come home for dinner. I would try to be home by 8 at night. I would spend some time with my kids before they went to bed. And I would spend some time with my husband, like we'd watch TV or whatever, because otherwise I'd never see him. And then when everybody was asleep, I'd go back to work. As a rule, I would work from about 11 a.m. to 2 a.m. Get up and go back to work the next day. And that was how I was able to accommodate my lifestyle. But I was self-employed and I could choose that schedule. Today, it's hard for people to, COVID allowed people to have flexibility, but what's going to happen when we come back post-COVID? And so I want to ask the question, if the third polling question is about whether our participants have organizations where they have a DEI strategy.
This is now the third poll out of 4 that we are launching today. Just a reminder that you must answer 3 out of 4. And the question is, does your organization have a DEI strategy in place? Yes, no, or not sure.
I was about to type a response to this. One woman said that the pants versus skirt story, they don't think it's really relevant today because that's not a practice. And thank you for sharing that. I certainly wasn't sharing it as a point of it being relevant today. I think the reason I was sharing it is because there are workplace norms that we may or may not agree with, and that they may or may not reflect who we are, and who we are in the workforce is different today. And so there might be a different.
Okay, I'm counting down the ending of the poll. 3, 2, 1. I'm going to close the poll. I'm going to go ahead and share the results. So 39% say yes, 29% say no, and 32% say not sure. Pretty close.
Pretty close. A third, so almost 40% said yes, but otherwise no or not sure. And sorry, so what I was saying there is she said the pants story isn't relevant, and then I just saw another comment popped up that said hairstyle is relevant today. So, you know, are you on mute?
No.
Oh, okay. It looked like you were saying something, but I didn't hear you. So you were just talking about diversity and flexibility. How then, so you had a point here, real voice. I'll go back to a couple of slides because these are the things that we've been talking about here. So that second from the last one that says real voice to affect change, not just a seat at the table. I think that part of what you're talking about is if we can share with our employers and our colleagues what we need, is that what you're saying? Then we can advocate for that?
Yeah, so what I mean is there's actually several things. So one is, let's think about in the corporate environment. Today, there's all these mandates, right? At least one minority, serve on a corporate board or something, right? So It doesn't matter. And all the countries follow suit. Actually, in Asia, they have mandates as well. My point is mandates is good, it's encouraging. But you don't just want it to be a representation at the table, and just not just have a seat at the table, but you actually want to have a voice. Are people listening to you? Like, does your voice have an impact? Can it make change? That's the most important. Otherwise, you just sit there. It doesn't mean anything. You say something, people just brush it off and move on, or they pretend that they hear it, right? Because all these seats at the table, they're representation of different cultures, different background, right? It's kind of what we talked about earlier. The different, the hairstyle, like the dress and pants. That's not even the point. That's kind of like an analogy of what we're talking about. If you don't agree with something, feel that, have a question, ask, right? Ask and see if it's really not relevant, right? And again, like in my mind, I kept on thinking, like, can we wear slippers at work, right? Of course not. But hey, who knows? Just saying.
Well, I think it's funny because you touched on a bunch of things there. Two things just I'll react to. One is there is a concern because of these mandates that the minority who's brought in, whether it's a racial minority, an ethnic minority, a gender minority, or here's one who ticks all the boxes, right?
Right.
An ethnic minority woman with a different race, right? I mean, you can do that. And she has a disability, right? Is that person a token? And are we really going to listen to that person? So there are real concerns of tokenism with mandates. And I'm not suggesting we have the answer. I'm just raising it as a thought that I was reacting to. And then the other thing is, although I will say, yes, if you're at the table, use your voice. Doesn't matter if you were there, even if there is a concern of tokenism, you have a voice, use it. To your point. The other thing I thought about with hair is that there is a very real issue. I would encourage our listeners to just check into some of the headlines about Black hair and ethnic hairstyles in particular. There seems to be a bit of a resurgence in some organizations to require hair to look a certain way. And I remember seeing this story of this young man. He was a wrestler. He had dreadlocks, and there was one of the referees literally cutting the dreadlocks off of his hair so that otherwise he wasn't able to wrestle. And he was in one of the top competitions. And so these things are very real. And yes, it's not necessarily that hair in particular or pants. But I do think there's stuff out there that's happening. It's not been my experience or your experience, but I think that I don't want to dismiss those experiences for the comments that are coming in. I want to acknowledge those folks.
I think ultimately it comes down to what's important to the individual, right? So let's just say if I really like to wrestle and it required to like shave my head, I don't want to, but I might, right? But then let's just say it's something that's important to me, I can never shave my hair. Like otherwise I felt like I lost myself, you know? Then, you know, like if it's so important to you, then bring it up and talk about it.
Yeah.
Like there's no right or wrong almost, but it's almost like acknowledge the person's and what they're saying. And I think, you know, like go back to this point about real voice to affect change. I wrote down here, like, you know, we're accountants. So we're accountants. We know how to make numbers work. So that's why I'm not very like a big fan. Well, I am a big fan of the mandate. It's so encouraged to see, but I think we need to look deeper than that, right? Like mandate is a good first step.
Yes.
But is it helping to really like for this cause, like this diversity and inclusion that we're talking about here? And also, you know, I think the idea of DEI really is to embrace all the culture, bring everyone together, really acknowledge them and their cultural background and all that, right? So hopefully one day, hopefully the goal really is hopefully one day we wake up and we want to go to work and not dread to work, right? And it can happen. Just think about in kindergarten, all these kids, right? Like whenever I talk to young kids, they're like, they miss school, they miss their friends, the place where they can play and learn, right? Yeah, of course, then you say, well, they're young kids, right? They know better. That's not true. I think as humans, we do want to go to a place where we contribute, you know, to be with people who share our belief. Of course, then you still fight, right? That's okay because you fight with your family and friends and whatever, right? That's okay. It's not say that, you know, you embrace each other and we're happily ever after never fight, right? That's not even realistic. So, but that's kind of the goal. And I think it takes a lot to get there, but that's the goal, right?
I genuinely believe that there's a 5-year-old inside of all of us. And when we can find that 5-year-old, we'd be a lot freer. We might say what we really think, listen with some curiosity about what other people say. But, you know, it's a journey. And of course, play in the sandbox too. I mean, you know, that's not a bad thing either. So I want to look at some of these questions that are coming in. So this one, I don't know when this came in the context of our conversation, but this is what it says. I think that some of those rules are there to please customers. This is a clothing thing. Before I wear something, I ask myself, if I see someone wearing this outfit, will I want them to provide services for me? What are your reactions to that?
Sure, it's perception. You know, if I meet someone, so I meet clients all the time, and if I meet my client for the very first time, of course I'm going to dress nicer. I've never dressed like this.
Yeah.
Well, it's Friday, so I give myself a break. Hey. But you know what I mean? It's perception. Of course you dress the part, but so there's a point there. But also, like I think for professional firms, there's also a point there. You know, you need to dress the part specifically when you go to clients to you know have that professionalism. But I think nowadays change in some industry, right? Because a lot of places have like casual Fridays, okay, not every day.
Yeah. There's another one. I don't know if we have time to answer it, but Albert, thank you. I'll probably be sure to add this in an upcoming session. I recently read about code switching, something that was completely new to me. It seems like that would tie in somehow, but I'm not sure how to make that connection. So I know how to, do you want to talk about that or do you want me to explain?
Yeah, please explain. Yep.
So code switching is when you make changes, subtle or not subtle, to different aspects, the way you speak, the way you walk, the way you talk, the clothes you wear, your hairstyles, etc., to either minimize an area that makes you different or try to blend in with everybody else. And I will speak in the context of me. Well, maybe this is not the right example, but talking white I've heard people, African Americans in particular, feel a need to, when they go to work, they talk in a way that their colleagues sound, not necessarily the way they would talk. That's probably the worst possible example. But it's really about covering up your differences to assimilate into the group. And you were talking about that before when you said you were quiet and you needed to not be quiet. But then you said later you learned these were the things that made you, those were part of your leadership superpowers, right? So earlier on you weren't sure and you covered it. And then as you gained confidence, you leveraged it.
Yes, exactly. And honestly, let me just add to that. As I speak more, I really have my voice heard. People start, asking me questions and all that. I actually really liked it. And I didn't like my old self. So I almost feel like, that's why I said oblivious to our leadership potential, right? We really didn't, because you didn't try. So one of the great points here, so earlier we talked about embrace your diversity, identity and all that, right? The second point to rise up in a position is to take risk. Because a lot of us just want to stay in that comfort zone, right? Me too. Like I said, I don't want to go out and talk to new clients, right? I would just have things come to me, but it doesn't happen that way. So you really have to take risks, and it's okay to fail. And I wanted to say it in the context of it's okay to fail if you give it your best, right? Now you learn. Exactly. Not just reckless. Okay, yeah, let's just do whatever, right? No, not that. Take risks. Take risks, and it's okay to fail if you give it your all, right? Because you will learn and you grow without even knowing it. So it's super important. Oh yeah. So to answer your question earlier, I think it depends. To try to kind of fit into the group, but I think I don't know. Ultimately, you have to feel comfortable and wanted to do it. And again, you might discover something you didn't even know. And I say it because I tried it so many times. I don't want it to just sound like a statement, yeah, of course it sounds good, right? So meaningless. It's not. I said that because I once thought that, but I actually did it a million times myself. So it was good for me to get out of my comfort zone. You grow that way.
I'm looking at your takeaways, and so what you're saying is, when you said embrace your identity, very much the be yourself, speak up, lift each other up. And if we all work hard to do our part, we'll get there. And those are really powerful. I'm looking at the time, and I just wanted to make sure, before we do the last polling question, I just wanted to make sure that were there any other thoughts? Karen added one. She said, we are more alike than different. Celebrate this with each other. Ooh, I like that.
Really good. Yep.
Any other thoughts you wanted to add here before we wrap up?
No, I think this is a great slide, which is what I tell people every day. And I also think, this DEI topic, it cannot be just, we finish the seminar, we forget about it. It has to be like a daily practice. You integrate these conversations. It starts with you. Again, it starts with you. And then, your surrounding, your dinner table, where you talk about it, right? If there's any disagreement between household members, let's talk about it, right? Let's have a more meaningful conversations than to fight and divide. That's not constructive.
So this was not intended to be a book promo, but I wanted to include this in here.
Yay, my
book just came out, and the reason I think it's really relevant here is your entire book is telling stories of other CPAs. For the record, I'm in the book, my story's there. I'm not putting that in there for that reason. The book is a celebration of diversity, and it shares the stories of a lot of different accountants, and shows just because you're an accountant or you're a CPA doesn't mean you're prescribed to be one way. And so we can all show up a little bit differently. So I'm just throwing it out there, Cece, give a little plug to your book. And before we do that last polling question, I just want to let everybody know that so this series is every other week. So 2 weeks from now, Barrett Young, he's a CPA here in Maryland with me. I asked him if he'd be willing to have a conversation about the phrase, I don't see color, because it tends to be a bit provocative. And so he's joining me to talk about his view and how it's changed around that. So I invite everybody to join us. I thank you for joining us, Cece. I mean, I just love your perspective, and I appreciate you taking the time to share it with us today.
No, thank you so much for the opportunity. Like I said, it's not like every day I get to be so open, especially with you. I know you're want people to be open, not just like the script. And so I actually just talk freely.
That's great. No, I appreciate it. All right, Lady Maya, back to you to close us out.
All right, here is the last poll of the webinar. You should see it on your screen. It says, do you feel your voice is represented by your organization's leadership? Yes, no, not sure, prefer not to say. That's a good one.
That gets, Cece, that gets me thinking about, you said it, the mandates.
Mm-hmm.
At some point we won't need mandates anymore, and everybody will be included, reflected. Leadership will reflect the diversity of the organization. That's what we're heading toward. I think that's where you were going with that.
Yeah. Wow. Did you like it? Did we have a good conversation?
Well, hold on. I'm looking to see what the response is. It says almost.
Wow.
Over half say yes so far, so that's promising.
Mm-hmm.
And only so far 16% say no. So
I'm going to go ahead and close this poll in 3, 2, 1. It is now closed, and I'll go ahead and share those results. 54% say yes, 16% no, 25% not sure, and 5% prefer not to say.
well, I would encourage everyone, our contact information is on our respective bio slides. If you have follow-up, feel free to ping us on LinkedIn and email. We're here.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and say thank you, Jina and Cece. We appreciate you being with us today. And with that, we have come to the conclusion of today's webinar. We here at CPA Academy will process your credit later today. That, along with a copy of this webinar and handouts, will be available in your CPA Academy account within 24 hours. And if you look in your email inbox, you will find the evaluation link for this webinar. All questions asked today will be forwarded in a full report to the presenter as well. There are some great comments coming in. Excellent. Thank you. Learned a lot. It's been a great webinar. So thanks again, Jina and Cece, for your great content, and to our members for your participation. Please check the schedule on our website for additional information, and we hope to see you on a future webinar. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.